latest episode of the Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Yes, I've been practicing my good day again, and no, I'm not going to do it again. Hang on, didn't I just say that last week? Anyway, as you can obviously tell from the title picture, we're still in the land of Oz, down under, so to speak, and this is going to be obviously the last episode of the show on Australian whiskies, and I think I wouldn't want to say that I've left the best till last, but certainly in this week's episode of the show we'll probably be we will be looking at possibly the most well-known of the Australian distilleries, and that obviously being Sullivans Cove. But there are two other distilleries that we'll be looking at as well today. We'll be sort of starting off, again, it was how do I taste these, and I just thought, well, the easiest thing to do is just sort of do each distillery as we go and leave the Sullivans Cove till the end. So we're going to kick off with the New World Distillery, which is found or can be found in Melbourne, and it is run by a chap called David Vital, who apparently after several years, 8 years I believe it was, running an e-learning business, decided that he really wanted to actually make beer, in actual fact, and was apparently sort of looking into sort of setting up a microbrewery and visiting microbreweries I'm guessing in Melbourne and the surrounding areas, and according to the information I could find out, had an encounter with a group of investors that were probably looking to invest in a whiskey distillery, and apparently David was into his whiskies and decided that in actual fact he'd rather make whiskey than beer, so set up the New World Distillery in an old airport hangar apparently. This was back in 2004, and has since then has a distribution deal in the UK. You can get the Starwood whisky as in the UK quite easily, and subsequently has moved to larger premises in Bertie Street in Melbourne, or just outside of Melbourne, and is apparently going from strength to strength. So they do currently two bottlings, one of which is aged in ex-Australian Shiraz casks, and the other bottling is aged in what is called Apera casks, or Apera casks. Hopefully I've got the pronunciation correct, which is an Australian form of sherry. So keeping everything sort of local, so to speak, and I'm guessing using local barley, unpeated, etc., etc., all the usual sort of things that you would expect from a sort of a small start-up distillery. The second distillery we're going to be looking at is the Old Hobart Distillery, which produces the Overeem range of whiskies. Now, those of you with long memories will probably remember that I did an episode of the show purely on Overeem, some years ago now, I think it was, when they first came to my attention. And the distillery itself is founded by a chap called Casey Overeem, and this was back in 2005, with production starting in 2007. Again, they do two bottlings, or did. Whether they've expanded or not, I couldn't honestly say. And well, they have actually. What am I talking about? I'm talking rubbish. I've got it written down here in front of me. The initial release was a sherry matured and a port matured, but I now believe they do a bourbon matured bottling as well, which unfortunately I don't have, but I would love to have tasted, because that, I think from memory, was one of the things that I was, yeah, okay, it's fine sort of using different wine casks and all that kind of stuff, but to me, I'd like to sort of get to know what the actual distillery's character is, and of course to get to know the distillery's character you either need to taste the new make, or if you can't do that, then obviously age it in American oak, and so you get more of the character. They've obviously started doing that, but unfortunately I don't have that sample. So obviously the sample that was entered into the 2015 World Whisky Awards was just the sherry matured. And finally we'll be looking at, like I said, probably the most well-known of the Australian distilleries, which is the Sullivans Cove Distillery. That distillery came to sort of I suppose, global prominence the year before, the French oak bottling won World Whisky of the Year 2014. Unfortunately, it didn't manage to do that the following year. That it was kind of pipped at the post by, I think it was the Catalan Vino Barrique, I believe, if memory serves me correct. But I certainly remember tasting both the Sullivans Cove bottlings and thinking they were, very, very impressive. So I've kind of kept those two to the end. The distillery itself was established in 1994 by a chap called Patrick Maguire. I don't really know too much about him, but I certainly found out that the distillery was sold in December of last year to a group led by some chap called Adam Sable, who was a lawyer, and again sort of probably got bored of being a high-powered lawyer and wanted to do something a little bit more artisanal, I guess, and has taken over the running of the distillery. He's kept all the workforce on board, including the distiller Patrick, to sort of smooth things over, and I don't know how much he does on a day-to-day basis, but I guess from what I've read, it was a case of if the distillery, I mean, it's a fairly small distillery. It has just a couple of stills, a 2,500 litre copper and stainless steel still with a capacity of just 17,500 litres per year, which is pretty minute, it has to be said. And I have a feeling that each of the bottlings they do are single cask bottlings, and I guess, like I said, if they wanted to increase production, move to bigger premises, all that, it basically meant an influx of the moolah, as they say, which is where this chap Adam kind of comes in, I suppose. So, like a lot of distilleries, you can either elect to stay small and boutique and just carry on doing what you're doing, or you can put money into it, expand, grow, all that kind of stuff. And there's always, I suppose, if you grow too quickly and too big, you can lose the sort of like the slightly boutique angle. You can get bogged down in sort of far too many ranges, etc., etc. So I mean, sometimes it's best to just stay small and unique. But I've certainly, that's not a criticism for any distillery that obviously wants to sort of push boundaries and try new things. And of course, trying new things and doing stuff like that is always going to come down to money at the end of the day, and well, somebody's got to pay for it, haven't they? So anyway, that's a very short and potted history of each of the distilleries. Obviously, if you want to find out more information on the distilleries, there is information online, and you can obviously go and have a look for yourselves. So as last week's episode of the show was a bit of a long one, I mean, a lot of cask strength whiskies, I'm going to try and keep this one to its usual length, so I think it's just time to have a look at this afternoon's range. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off today's tasting looking at the two Starwood bottlings. The first one we're looking at is the Wine Cask Edition number 1. Now, I'm assuming that they're obviously sold out of the Wine Cask Edition number 1 and probably onto, I don't know what edition they're onto, but I'm guessing that the bottling or the maturation of each individual bottling is probably no different to the first one, which was aged in recoopered 100 and 200 litre ex-Australian Shiraz casks. So like I said, they're keeping it as kind of Australian as possible, so to speak, by using sort of local casks and things like that. And the same goes for the second bottling, the Apera cask, which, as I said, was a form of Australian style sherry. As you can see, quite a dark colour. I don't know what the age of the spirit actually is. We'll obviously get some indication of that when we taste it, but I can't imagine it's particularly old. Then we're going to move on to the Overeem sherry cask matured. This was bottled at 43% and matured in ex-sherry French oak quarter casks. So again, if memory serves me correct, I think this was about 6 years old, and probably about as long as you want to age it for in quarter casks, I guess, because obviously, as you know, the whole point about aging in quarter casks is to get sort of, you know, a more quicker maturation period, or certainly more wood contact to sort of you know, quicken things up, so to speak. I don't know whether they've now sort of stopped using quite so much quarter casks. I honestly don't know. I'm probably guessing not, but and as I mentioned earlier, I did an episode of the show some time ago, just purely on the Overeem range. So if you fancy sort of looking at it with a bit more detail, then please feel free to go and have a look at that episode. And finally, like I said, we'll be looking at Sullivans Cove, the most well-known of the Australian distilleries because of that win in the 2014 World Whisky Awards. We've got the two bottlings, and like I said, I believe they're single cask bottlings. I couldn't tell you what the cask numbers were, so I don't get that kind of level of information. First bottling we'll be looking at is the American Oak cask. This, I believe, was a 14-year-old, bottled at 47.5, and finally we'll be looking at the French Oak cask, which I believe at the time was a 12-year-old, also bottled at 47.5%. And like I said, it was the French Oak cask that won the 2014 World Whisky of the Year Awards winner. So hopefully that's going to be still pretty damn good. So anyway, I guess we may as well start with the Starwood then. So this is the Starwood Wine Cask Edition number 1. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Quite a lot of oak. It's got that sort of toffee, sort of almost marzipan-y sort of character. It's got a, strangely enough, it's got a kind of like almost like a corn, a sort of a fat corn, toffee, heavy, oily, weighty nose. There's some spicy kind of black fruits just sort of sitting in the background. Maybe there's a little bit of barley. It's a very, very chunky nose, and I'm not going to say it lacks elegance, but it's kind of, it's a chunky nose, shall we say. For me personally, I just think it's just a little bit too much oak. It's just, I'm not getting, I'd like to get a little bit more elegant distillery character, but yeah, I can see the appeal of this particular whisky, but I think certainly my initial reactions and tasting notes are the same as they are now when I'm retasting it, that there's probably just a smidgen too much oak going on here, but anyway, let's see what the palate gives us. Really sweet, very Shiraz-y, lots of black fruits, spice. I think it's just lacking a little something for me. I don't want to say it's kind of flabby, because the spirit is, you can feel there's a spirit underneath there, but again, all that oak is just kind of masking the spirit character for me, and I would just love to know what is the character of the distillery, because I can't tell from that. Like I said, all I'm getting is oak. It's a little bit short. Maybe if it had been bottled at a higher ABV, the additional alcohol might just have kind of offset all that kind of Shiraz sweet character. Possibly if that had been bottled at 43 as opposed to 41, that might have helped. I don't know. Just kind of a guess on my part from having tasted a fair amount of whisky. So I think the quality is pretty damn good. You can't argue with that, and I'm sure there are going to be lots of people that kind of love that style of whisky. But for me, yeah, I just balances a tad off, I think. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Apera cask. Now this is bottled at 43%, and so I can't see why they bottled the wine cask at 41%, but you know, they obviously had a reason for that, and if anyone from the distillery is watching, let me know. Anyway, let's see what the nose gives. Again, I'm getting that almost kind of fat corn character. I mean, maybe that is the distillery character. There's a lot of sherry, but it's kind of almost kind of feels refill sherry. It's not kind of big herbal Oloroso style sherry. It's kind of more lighter, nuttier kind of sherry. There's a little bit of almost estery fruit notes, some sweet spices, some cocoa powder. I think actually I'd kind of prefer this to the wine cask. I mean, I'm maybe that, like I said, this kind of almost kind of big fat corn character is the distillery character, and maybe that's what it all comes down to. Like I said, it would be nice to sort of see what this is like in American oak to see if that was indeed the case. I mean, it's pleasant, it's deep. I think if you obviously like sherry cask matured whiskies, this is going to be up your street. And yeah, it does have a sort of an element of elegance. Like I said, it's not a big herbal winey sherry monster, but there is a lot of sherry character there. You know, they're getting a little bit of cereal now, sort of almost sort of Weetabixy notes. But yeah, let's see what the palate's like. It's pleasant, it's relatively simple. My initial reaction is it's a little underpowered, even though it's 43%. Possibly that's me from sort of tasting far too many sort of, you know, cask strength whiskies, but it's mellow, it's pleasant, it's sherried, it's, like I said, it's a bit straightforward. There's some dried fruit, again a little bit of spice, cocoa powder. It kind of pretty much opens up and carries on in the same kind of vein. And again, like I said, the quality isn't bad. It's not a bad quality whiskey at all. And I don't know what it retails for. Maybe I should have sort of checked that one out for value for money. But they're on the right track, I think. Maybe it, like I said, release an American oak aged version, possibly up the alcohol level, give it a little bit more intensity, because this it just tastes a little underpowered, even though it's 43%. So, but you know, not a bad couple of whiskies to open with. Okay, so now let's move on to the Overeem. Let's see what nose gives us on this end, shall we? Again, a touch more sherry character, some herbal notes, some boiled sweets. It does seem to sort of be relatively youthful, although it's quite nicely rounded, it's soft. It's all, again, sherry cask. I'm not getting any sort of real barley, I'm not really getting a feel for what the distillery character itself actually is. I mean, it's got a fair amount of complexity. There's a little bit of citrus, there's a touch of pepper, again a bit of cereal. Yeah, I mean, it's a pleasant nose again, but like I said, on a million and one occasions, you know, it is all about the sherry cask. Let's see what the palate's like. It's got a nice kind of mouth-watering finish, kind of quite juicy prunes, walnut, a bit of spice. Again, that sort of cereal kind of character, a little bit like warm Weetabix. which again sort of is a sort of an indicator of a relatively young spirit. You wouldn't expect that kind of serially kind of character to be present in something maybe double its age, but obviously it's only 6. For a 6-year-old spirit, I think it's very rounded, it's pleasant, it's easy to drink, but again, it's all about the sherry cask. And although the sherry is blemish free, and the same could be said for the Starwood, there's absolutely no off notes in those whiskies whatsoever. Ultimately, I just find this particularly just unexciting, but good quality. Yeah. So on to the 2 Sullivans Cove bottlings. This is the American oak, so let's see what the nose gives us on this end. That is lovely. Now, yes, this is 14 years old, pretty much, over double the age of the other 2 whiskies, but, and this is the kind of key thing, this is the American oak bottling. I'm getting estery pineapple, ginger, barley, honey, sort of slightly kind of manuka-y kind of honey, a little bit of herbal notes. Oh, it's just absolutely gorgeous. Loads and loads of fruit, really fruity, really estery. And this is why this whiskey is so good, in my opinion, because I'm getting all of the character of the whiskey. I'm getting to know the distillery. Yes, there's obviously a little bit of vanilla oak kind of coming through, but it's all kind of sat in the background. It's all kind of nicely sort of supportive, and the spirit itself is just absolutely stunning, really elegant. It's just got such an amazing depth, and like I said, it is not because it is 14 years old. That to me is an irrelevance almost. What I've got here in the glass is just, it just tells me what the distillery is doing and what the distillery is all about. And oh, that is good. That is wonderful. Let's see what the palate's like. It's a little bit more oak on the palate, but only just at the beginning, and then the spirit comes in. It's got an almost mineral freshness, which is obviously the alcohol helping that. There's a touch of honey. Again, there's a slightly estery fruit, some pineapple, apricot, mouth-watering. Again, I'm actually getting a little bit of sort of almost boiled sweets on the finish. A slightly sort of, the kind of boiled sweet note that you would expect to find in Auchentoshan. And I think from memory, looking at the pictures of the distillery, I think it has quite a sort of an odd looking still, which is kind of quite sort of squat, but then has this kind of big sort of onion shaped kind of neck, for want of a better words. I think that's the Sullivans Cove distillery. It could be the other one. I could be completely making this one up, but I get the impression that the spirit has got quite a high rectification character. Hence that sort of boiled sweet Auchentoshan-y kind of character. And if I'm right in thinking that is the still from Sullivans Cove, that big boil ball is going to effectively give you a lot of rectifying rectification and a lot of sort of like falling back of the spirit. I mean, you can get the same kind of the same kind of effect from obviously a tall neck, and I'm guessing a lot of certainly from looking at the pictures of these distilleries, they don't appear to be sort of housed in huge buildings, and I'm guessing the buildings have already been there and purpose built, so it's not like they could sort of like have a tall neck still. They're kind of working with the space that they have available, and this obviously seems to work for them really, really well, because that is a stunning whiskey. I love that. Right, okay, and moving on to the French oak cask. Now, I think the French oak casks come from a winery, looking at, the McWilliams winery in New South Wales. So, again, I'm guessing these are not going to be sort of fresh French oak. These are obviously going to be ex-wine casks. So, let's see what the nose gives us. That is a fantastic nose. It's got sort of dusty spices, that sort of classic taut, tannic French oak, a little bit of almost raspberry jam note. Okay, I'm going to say that I prefer the American oak bottling. This doesn't have the esteriness, but it's got some lovely sort of barley character beneath it. It's balanced, it's harmonious. It's not kind of swamped by the wine character. Yes, the wine character is there, but it's all really nicely balanced. There's a little bit of dark chocolate kind of coming out now. But like I said, I can see why this was World Whisky of the Year in 2014, because it is absolutely stunning. Like I said, my personal preference, and when I looked at my scoring after for the event, I gave this one, I think, 9.3, and the American at 9.4. So not a lot to choose from them between them in quality, and it's just a lovely nose. Really, very, very impressive. Let's see what the palate's like. Gently winey. Oh, that's got a spicy kick on the finish. The wininess kind of like starts off quite dominant and then kind of slips off a little bit, getting a sort of slightly porty dried fruit finish. Again, some spices, some barley coming through on the middle, a little bit of ginger. Slight herbalness. Again, that's probably more coming from the actual wine cask, because certainly that herbally kind of character was not, I didn't kind of pick that up in the American oak bottling, and certainly Australian Shiraz can have that kind of camphory kind of herbal kind of character. So the palate is, like I said, a little bit more emphasis on the wine cask. And a little bit less on the distillery character, but still got some lovely progression, lovely intensity. Yeah, I can see why that's had the accolades that it's had. So nice one to finish on. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. Well, I think we've kind of wrapped up Australia quite nicely. I think. From these two episodes of the show, I think the Australian whisky industry is very much alive and kicking. There's a lot of diversity, which is good. And although some of these bottlings might not be particularly to my taste, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to be to your taste. So Starwood, yeah, I think although they've obviously been in production for a while now, I just get the feeling that. If it was me, I would do things a bit differently, but obviously I'm not running the distillery. And like I said, I think the wine cask edition was just a little bit underpowered and a little bit too much on the wine and not enough on the distillery character. The sherry cask, again, I just thought was a pretty simple, straightforward, clean, but again, sort of slightly underpowered whiskey. Just, again, my personal opinion. The Overeem, again, not a bad whiskey. Good, clean sherry. A bit more complexity, but again, nothing to really sort of write home about or excite me. It has to be said. And like with both of those particular whiskies, I just don't get a sense of what is the character of the whiskey that they're producing. Whereas, on the other hand, the American oak bottling, the American oak matured Sullivans Cove, certainly told me everything I wanted to know about what that distillery is doing. And that distillery is doing a fantastic job. That is a stunning whiskey. And if you can get your hands on a bottle, and I think they are available in the UK if you're lucky, and yes, you are going to pay sort of 3 figures for them, but bloody worth it, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. And the French oak edition, yeah, lovely. Again, I think, like I said, I prefer the American oak matured bottling, but certainly I think the French oak one has got plenty of character, plenty of complexity, and yeah, like I said, I think that this is a distillery to keep an eye on, and hopefully, if they don't change their style or lose sight of who they actually are at this moment in time, with all this influx of additional cash and possibly moving to larger premises and all that kind of stuff, and more stills, etc., etc., I still think this is going to be a distillery to keep an eye on. So there you have it. That's Australia well and truly wrapped up. I mean, obviously I know there are a lot more distilleries than the 6 that I've been looking at this week, but this is all the samples I have, and I hope you've enjoyed my little look at Australia. Next episode of the show will be somewhere else in the world, funnily enough. So until then, I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the show, and all that's left to say is good afternoon and good dram.